Hey everybody, welcome back to Pragmatic EDH. Today we are going to be moving from red, like we talked about in our last two-part video, onto another two-part video here. We're going to be talking about my second favorite color, blue. I really like blue, so let's just jump into it so we can talk about it. So as a quick aside, for those of you who've been living under a rock, at least in terms of Magic, for the past, since release date, blue is the color of control. Blue is the color of card draw, and blue is the color of annoyance, especially if you're a player who prefers to do things in a solitary fashion without getting interacted with. This is not what the goal of the color is, however. It is simply to interact with you, and by you I mean your opponents, as much as you can. To jump into why blue is my second favorite color of all of the colors, is really that it has the most win lines or types of play that I really enjoy. It's got mill, clearly the most Chad alpha strategy, and then it has other things like copying other people's effects and spells and permanents and all that stuff, where if I don't feel like running good cards in my deck, why don't I just run yours instead? And that can be just enough to beat people, and I personally find beating people with their own strategies to be very enjoyable. So that's why I think that blue is my second favorite overall, because it does everything else. So next up, we are going to be jumping into the primary strategies of blue. Again, if you're not new, this shouldn't be anything surprising. However, we're just going to go over it really quickly and just kind of mention the big archetypes, the big four, as I've kind of identified them. There may be more, but I feel like that's getting too specific. Anyway, jumping into it. Control or counter spells. I have it listed as preventative actions. And so these are cards that will stop people from doing something either by using a card or having a card in play that stops them from doing it, barring something like a cost or just a full prevention. The next type of strategy is kind of bounce. So what I mean by that is returning cards from play to their owner's hand, effectively negating an action that someone has taken. Third is copying, where essentially, once again, you're creating a strategy based off of your opponent's strategy and existing stuff that you have. And finally, we've got the king, the ruler, the emperor, the man with the heavy crown. We have mill. Clearly the best strategy here, obviously. And mill will sometimes get you there, but more often than not, if there's a player playing anything with green or black in it, you will just die to them, and then the rest of the table will hate you, and it'll be hilarious. So there you go. Blue, being host to a litany of very usable and powerful cards, has made it really strange to pick out, at least for me, some commanders I really identify as either my favorite or I really enjoy them. And I've actually had to go back and check which decks I've built multiple times to see which ones I actually really liked playing, or ones that had such an impact on me, not in a game against me, but more like when I played them, it felt so like visceral to just pull it off. It's almost like, like a little villain arc, because it was so like devious. I felt so clever or something. It was just really enjoyable. The first on this list is going to be Naban, Dean of Iteration. Naban, Dean of Iteration, is a 1 in a blue human wizard that's legendary. That's a 2/1 that says if a wizard entering the battlefield causes a permanent of an ability you control to trigger, it triggers an additional time. This is crazy. I have played Naban several times. I really, really like Naban. It's super funny to play, and it has lots of infinites, which I enjoy. I like infinite combos because sitting in a long grindy game isn't always what I want to do. But besides that, it also just values. It's so hard to stop once it gets going, even though you have a 2-minute 2/1 that's like your big point of failure, I guess would be the way to describe it. It's actually fairly simple to just go A plus B equals C with it, and I love that. Alright, on to the next one. We have Drafna, founder of Latinam. I don't know how to say that, but that's fine. 2/1 human artificer advisor, pay 1 in a blue, return an artifact you control to its owner's hand, and pay 3 colorless and tap it to copy an artifact spell you control. This is crazy. I have built this deck a couple times and found there were some funny, unique, kind of one-card infinites to this deck with Ugin's Nexus. It was really interesting. Anyway, deck was wicked cool. The commander was kind of the weak point, but also the way that the deck really built a lot of advantage. So there was a lot going on. I just remember playing this deck a lot, and a lot of the times either really enjoying the game or getting several compliments from people how cool it was. And this one really stuck out to me as one of my favorites, more just because of the play environment I was in at the time when the shop near my house was doing consistent like special events and stuff where you'd have to build to a theme and things like that. It was really cool. Anyway, so this commander just really looks to do artifact strategies, and that's, I mean, really all that's special about it is it's just a new artifact deck in the new era because it's from Brothers War, so it's probably going to be good. After Drafna, we have Yawan, Lawan, Cephalid Empress. I am not super sure how to pronounce that, but I think it's a Y sound, or at least that sounds right to me with Yawan. Yawan is a 2/3 Cephalid Noble that when it comes into play, you bounce all blue creatures your opponents control to their hand, and your opponents can't play blue creature spells. Now, blue creature spells are very good, especially in higher power, and that's why this deck ends up meaning so much to me, is because I ended up buying the foil because I was kind of prospecting on it a long time ago. Anyway, the whole reason I ended up building this is because I had the foil, I wanted things to look cool, and I really wanted to try and make a blue deck that countered other blue decks without using counterspell all that much. And locking creatures was the best thing I could think of that didn't just stop instants and sorceries entirely. So I ended up building this thing, and I kept pushing it, and eventually it kind of turned into this kind of fringe CDH deck. It was very strange, but the entire point of it was to get out Painter Servant and protect it, naming blue, and then just running out Yawan, and then locking a majority of game plans out of the game while I could kind of just play solitaire. And that was really interesting, at least probably for me. I don't think a lot of my opponents enjoyed it all that much. And I remember just thinking like, man, this deck's super cool. I'm so glad I decided to kind of deviate from the database here. Next up is a bit of an odd one. It is Jalira, Master Polymorphist. Jalira is a 2/2 human wizard with the ability to pay 2 and a blue, tap, sacrifice another creature, and then reveal cards from the top of your library until you reveal a non-legendary creature. Put that card onto the battlefield and the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. This commander is just the card Polymorph. This card ended up being kind of my first foray into blue, because it was, to me at the time, the least blue commander I could think of. These days I think of it as a very middle of the road kind of average blue style of play with just kind of a unique twist on exactly what your goal is, that's all. The entire point of this deck is to try and cheat mana costs, obviously, but also originally in the last iteration of it I built, because again I built this one about 3 times, was to cheat into play Hullbreaker Horror. And that is a very powerful magic card that goes infinite in a lot of ways, and allowing yourself to be able to kind of go semi-infinite or full infinite with it and have access to all this silly nonsense you're already doing anyway because you're a mono blue deck makes the deck just feel real tight. But again, having a 4-mana commander and then having it have a mana costing tap ability and needing a card in play just made it so the deck didn't really stick around for more than a couple games because it just wasn't breaking parity all that hard, or the randomness was either tilting me or my opponents too much. So I figured after the 3rd time I kind of would give this one a rest. But I remember really enjoying this commander. It kind of follows this weird play pattern of your commander's kind of the last thing you're going to want to be doing, and you're always finding ways to either reanimate instants and sorceries or find some big dumb Kraken or hitting an Eldrazi. And it was very fun, but also it was a very surreal kind of deck. It just didn't feel like it was ever meant to last for a long time, at least for me. But I really did enjoy it when I played it. Alrighty, next up is Thassa, Deep Dwelling. A 4-mana 6/5 legendary enchantment creature god with indestructible, and isn't a creature unless your devotion to blue is 5 or more. Has the passive ability of, at the beginning of your end step, exile up to 1 target creature you control, then return to the battlefield under your control, pay 3 and a blue, tap another target creature. This card is crazy. All of the indestructible, devotion dependent gods are usually really strong. There's only a few that I can think of that aren't even really all that good, but they're still really good. Or at least they may have gotten a better version of themselves. Thassa is a good example. The original Thassa was cool, but not as cool as this one in my opinion. I like this deck a lot because flicker strategies are something I have kind of becoming more and more known for recently. It's kind of become a play pattern I found very entertaining. And personally, I have trouble like developing value, so flicker always kind of helps to mitigate my bad draw. This commander allows for a very strange toolboxy strategy where you just pick your best ETB trigger among creatures you control and just do it again at the end of your turn, which is really good in a blue deck where if you're trying to do control, you can flicker your instant or sorcery reanimators, you can flicker your bounce creatures, or you can flicker your board wipe creatures. There are a couple of them in blue that just say, okay, cool, well, bounce everything that isn't this or your opponent's control. It's very strong, and I really like Thassa because that's a very interesting but also straightforward line of play, and I appreciate the straightforwardness of the deck, but giving you options in a straightforward deck is always very entertaining. Plus, I love all the Theros gods. They're kind of what got me into Magic in the first place, so Thassa deserved a spot on this list. Moving right along, we have Jin Gitaxias Progress Tyrant. 7-drop 5/5 Phyrexian Praetor. That whenever you cast an instant, sorcery, or artifact spell, copy that spell. You may choose new targets. This ability triggers only once each turn. Whenever an opponent casts an artifact, instant, or sorcery, counter that spell. This ability triggers only once each turn. This is one of those commanders where if you played against it, you certainly know it. And if you're playing around Kamigawa Neon Dynasty block, you kind of were worried to see it in at least commander pods. I don't really saw any play outside of Commander, maybe in like Pioneer or Standard, I'm unsure. Anyway, this thing was an absolute beast. It was a Tyrant, as its name implies, and people were really high on this card when it first came out because it's just ridiculously strong. The 7 mana, though, is a little hard to justify, and that is kind of what I think has pushed people from not playing it as much, and it kind of salts people too. You get a lot of unhappy folks when they can't do the one thing a turn they wanted to do. So the reason I love Jin Gitaxias playline, I like if you can do something, you do it twice, and really it'll always be entertaining for me to be able to just say no to people while also saying yes to please. It's a pretty simple commander, but it's deadly as all heck. Lastly, I figure I would point out a commander that I really like that kind of breaks the mold of a lot of these strategies. And I really bring this up because all of these decks have the strategies that they can run that all blue spells can run, like the big 4 of, counter spells, bounce, copy, mill, whatever. I like this one commander particularly because it actually gives you another option, which is beats, which is so strange in a color that allows you to really only play kind of more control-y strategies. Tetsuko Umezawa is able to allow you to attack your opponents pretty much completely safely because you give unblockable the majority of the things you're going to be sending because it gives creatures with 1 power or 1 toughness unblockable. And it itself is a 1/3, I believe. So it ends up having a lot of really interesting play lines. It's a trade-off. I find this commander super interesting. I've built it twice. I was really, really excited about it when it first came out because I was like, finally, a blue commander that isn't blue. And this is still kind of when I was transitioning out of my blue hatred phase, I guess. It took a really long time. It took several years because I was a hard Selesnya only player for a very, very long time. But Tetsuko Umezawa is one of those strange commanders that sees play in only a few niche decks, but I've really never seen anyone besides maybe like myself and one other person ever build it as the commander, because it's really efficient. It adds a game plan that is already something that's not really available to most decks in blue regardless to begin with, and it gives you access to all the normal stuff in blue. I just think the commander's really good, and I think it's highly underrated. And I've been honestly thinking about rebuilding a deck, so it plays really well with a couple cards. I think the card is called Mist Syndicate Naga. It's a very powerful card in the deck because it's a 3/1 that keeps making copies of itself every time it makes combat damage happen. And since it's unblockable, it's even more dangerous. It just becomes crazy, and the deck is really fascinating, and it's a strange departure from what you'd usually expect out of a mono blue strategy. Just to quick give a thanks to everybody who's tuned in, I wanted to say thank you so much. And to leave you with a heads up, this is again a two-part video. The next video will be talking about kind of the best cards, strengths and weaknesses, and really what's going on. It'll be similar to a video that is releasing as of tomorrow when I'm recording, so I am planning to just kind of stagger these out, and if you disagree with this, please feel free to leave a comment in the video. I check it every day, so feel free to let me know your feedback, and if you have a schedule you'd prefer me to release on, I will try my best to accommodate. Anyway, folks, thank you so much for watching or listening and tuning in. I'm Pragmatic EDH, thank you so much, and may the blue gods bless you with their BS.